So why exactly is college so expensive? I'm Tyler Richardson, and I'm the author of the book Drowning a Generation: Why Student Loan Debt Has Nothing to Do with Education. And I'm a recent college graduate myself. I graduated in 2010, and I worked in the business affairs department of a public university for several years. And the university that I was at from 2005 to 2015 increased the cost of tuition and fees by about 90% over that 10-year time period. So this is a pretty dramatic increase, right? Not that it's necessarily inconsistent with what you saw at public universities across the country during this 10-year time period, but nonetheless, a 90% increase to attend a public university is pretty dramatic. And so at the university I was at, this caused a lot of discussion amongst students. And a group of student journalists wanted to get to the bottom of this issue and try to figure out why were they paying so much more than they did just 5 or 10 years back. So they organized a meeting with the university administration with intending to ask these questions and get to the bottom of this issue. And the university administrators essentially told the students that the entirety of the price increase was tied to government funding cuts. So you know the story, right? The government slashed state appropriations, and as a result, universities had to hike up tuition and fees to make up for the lost revenue that they were no longer receiving from the state. Well, I was an employee in the business affairs department, and I was seeing the funding numbers, and I knew that this explanation was 100% untrue. It never happened. The university got $138 million from the state government 10 years ago, in 2005, and in 2015 the university received $145 million from the state government. So from 138 to 145 million, that's not a cut. And over this same time period, enrollment had actually decreased slightly. So the university was getting more money from the state government for fewer students. And the state appropriations are just one piece of the government funding formula. So in addition to the state money, the university also gets federal money intended to subsidize the cost for students. And so from 2005 to 2015, that same 10-year period, the federal money that was coming in had increased from $9 million to $23 million. It had more than doubled. And so the federal money that was coming in pretty easily made up for stagnant state appropriations that maybe hadn't quite kept pace with the rate of inflation. And so when you added up the state and federal funding that was intended to subsidize costs for students, there was more money coming in per student than ever. And that's true even when you're adjusting for inflation. And so this idea that administrators were telling students that the 90% increase in tuition and fees was somehow tied to a government funding cut that never actually happened really bothered me. I felt like the administrators were just lying to students. And so I started to look into this issue a little bit more, and what I found out was this exact same set of circumstances was playing out at public universities across the country. Students are starting to become very concerned with the price of tuition and fees. And when they ask university administrators what's going on, what's leading to the big price hike, they always hear the same answer, and that's that government funding has been cut, and that's completely contradictory to the numbers. When you look at the numbers, it's just never happened. State appropriations vary from state to state. Some states have cut state appropriations for higher education modestly, but federal funding is up across the board. And to say that the price hike is tied to some overall government funding cut, it's just totally inconsistent with the actual numbers. And so I started to wonder, how are universities getting away with this? How are they so successful in convincing not just students, but parents and taxpayers that the big increase in tuition and fees is somehow tied to this funding cut that never actually happened? And what I found out was that there is a lot of deception and misinformation on this issue. So one thing that universities often do is they always only give these numbers as a percentage of their budget. So what they'll say is state appropriations used to pay for 20% of our budget, but now it only pays for 10% of our budget. Well, this may be true, but it's also really misleading because the decrease in the percentage doesn't have anything to do with funding cuts. It just has to do with the fact that most universities spend about double today from what they did 10 years ago. So I always tell students, try using the same logic with your parents. If your parents give you $500 a month for, to subsidize the cost of living, and you go spend $1,000 a month on rent, well, your parents are paying for 50% of the cost of your rent, right? They're giving you $500 and you're spending $1,000 on rent. Now, if you change apartments and you go rent an apartment that costs $2,000 a month, now all of a sudden that $500 is only covering 25% of the cost of your rent. So if you go to your parents and say, I need more money because the percentage that you're subsidizing dropped, they're going to say, come on, we gave you the same amount of money we did last month. You're just spending way more. And so it's not going to work because it doesn't really make sense. It's not due to less money that you're getting. It's just due to more money that you're spending. So this is a pretty misleading statistic, right? But universities say it all the time. And one thing I've noticed is that universities will absolutely never give funding information in a straightforward way. They'll never say, this is what we got 10 years ago and this is what we get now. And this is obviously very intentional, because if they did this, if they presented the information in a straightforward way, it'd be really obvious that there's never been a cut. And so it's really, it's just a misinformation and deceptive campaign to kind of give statistics that seem to represent something that they actually don't represent. And so this is one strategy that universities and their public relations teams have for kind of misinforming the public about what's going on here. But the other thing that you see a lot these days that's even more manipulative is that universities will use information that comes from essentially made-up organizations. And the most common one you'll see, at least the one that I'm most familiar with, is called the Academy of Arts and Sciences. So you hear that term and it sounds like a legitimate organization that's probably out there doing their own research on this issue, right? Well, as it turns out, the Academy of Arts and Sciences is just a bunch of university administrators. It's a group of university administrators that gets together and issues publications on the issue of university financing. And so they say all kinds of things that are just totally contradictory with the actual numbers. So they say that state appropriations have been slashed dramatically. That's not true. They say that federal funding has been cut, which is almost laughable. Federal funding has more than doubled over the past decade. So I have no idea where these numbers come from. They say universities are doing a great job. They manage their budgets really well. They've cut administrative expenses, all just absolutely ridiculous if you look at the numbers. And so this information it makes a lot more sense when you know it's coming directly from university administrators, right? But students don't know this. And so the universities take this information and they pass it along to students to say, see, it's not just us saying this, it's also the Academy of Arts and Sciences, and students have no idea that it's an organization that's literally just making up information. And so you can see why I say that there's a lot of deception on this issue. And it's gotten to the point that a lot of the information that public universities really try to push is almost fraudulent. And I don't use that term lightly. I know that's a really serious accusation, but the definition of a fraud is using trickery or deceit for a person's own financial benefit. And I think that's exactly what they're doing here. This system as it works today is so beneficial for university executives. It's resulted in university executives being paid salaries that are oftentimes $1 million salaries. And it's not just the salaries. That's actually just one component of their compensation. They also get almost unlimited travel on the university's dime. They get university-funded brand new vehicles, sometimes even a university-funded house. And so the system is a really great one for them. And if they can make the public believe that the big cost increase is not due to anything they're doing, it's not due to their decisions, it's not due to their salaries, it's just due to a change in government policy that in reality never actually happened. But if they can get the public to believe that, it takes the scrutiny off them. And the system can kind of continue on the same path it's going. And if the public actually knows what's behind the increasing price, There's probably going to be a lot of people upset. There's going to be a lot of outrage. The system will probably change. Let me tell you what, they do not want the system to change because it's a great system for them. They're essentially government employees, and they are paid ridiculously generous salaries for government employees. And so you can see why I say it's almost fraudulent. They're pushing this campaign of misinformation to get people to think that the price increase is due to something that it's just absolutely not due to. So you cannot trust the information that comes from your university and from their public relations teams. I would really encourage you as students or as taxpayers to do your own research on this issue. Look at the financial statements from 2005 and look at the financial statements from 2015 and look at what the numbers say and why the numbers say that the cost has gone up so dramatically. And it's something very, very different from what they're telling you. So I've written a book on this issue called Drowning a Generation. It looks at the numbers from the 10 largest public universities in the country. But I can't look at the numbers from every single school, so I would really encourage you as students or as taxpayers to look at the numbers yourself and really become informed and educated about what's driving the student loan epidemic. Such an important issue, and I think that you have every right to know where your money's going and why it's gotten so expensive.